Right, hey guys, we're doing back another video from Mother's Basement, and today we're going to be checking out the problem with power fantasy anime, which is interesting because I'm currently loving solo leveling at the moment, and I feel like it's doing something slightly different to most power fantasies, but I'm not quite sure what. I'm hoping Jeff will figure it out for me.
Power fantasies become a bit of a dirty word in modern anime discourse. Toss that label at some folks' favorite show, and they're liable to toss you out a window. And to a certain extent, I get it. It's a phrase that calls to mind the filthy, stat screen smothered bottom of the isekai barrel, the middest of mid-tier battle shonen, and countless
Seven Deadly Sins being called the middest.
slapped together
Me made nails there, and that's I was saying that, but it was on screen at the time.
Potter likes about high-concept high schools where tournament arc performance is like 80% of your grade. A whole lot of schlock that makes a whole lot
Berserker Gluttony! I actually kind of enjoyed that.
of money. Because after a long drain
I found that really hard to get into after it.
day at the business factory or learning prison, a whole lot of people just want to sit down, wind down,
I like
and
Shield
live
Hero.
vicariously through a cool guy doing cool
Mate,
things
solo leveling's
with
so good.
bed. This shit's like crack to our burned out monkey brains, and like crack, it doesn't have to be particularly good so long as it gets you hyped. But that doesn't mean there's no
Overlords.
such thing as fine grain, high grade cocaine,
Uh-huh.
or that the difference doesn't matter. I probably could have picked a better metaphor for this. Point is, power fantasies can be made well, and
Mate, Evidence in the Shadow is a freaking good example of a great power fantasy anime. Like, Evidence in Shadow, really good.
even integrated into deep, intelligent stories with interesting things to say. They just aren't most of the time. So the term has basically become synonymous with shitty anime.
Yes.
But maybe
It's too
if
much
we
of it.
talk about what the ones that are do differently, one day there might be enough of the good shit for me to down a whole pint of it. Power fantasies have been a prominent, dominant part of the anime
Dragon
landscape
Ball
for as long
Z.
as there's been a landscape. Sure, Tetsuwan Atom is a beautiful, human story about found family processing grief, the evils of war and discrimination, and our tenuous balance with the natural world, but Astro Boy is also a show about a little kid doing Superman stuff to beat up big scary robots, and if someone took a time machine back to 1963 to ask 100 Japanese children what they're watching the show for, I doubt Steve Harvey would give you a lot of points for saying the themes. And power fantasy anime have ranked among the top-rated shows on air basically ever since. At first mostly sticking to the same American superhero mold as Astro, though Tetsujin 28 Go laid the foundation for the more distinctly Japanese fantasy of controlling that big scary robot the very same year. And 1967's Sally the Witch would offer Japanese girls their own flavor of power fantasy in the nascent magical girl genre.
Aw.
Go Nagai then found incredible success taking all three concepts into
Devilman.
edgier, more teen-friendly territory in the early 70s with Devilman, Mazinger Z, and Cutie Honey. And even as the decade wore on and anime for adults started to become a thing, power fantasies didn't go away. Mobile Suit Gundam, the defining anime of the 1980s, turns the core conceit of those early mecha stories on its head, subjecting its teen pilot hero to heartrending loss and PTSD in a morally gray conflict with no real good guys, just less bad guys. But at the end of the day, Amuro is still an unstoppable warrior whose unrivaled, psychically enhanced skill in battle permanently bends the entire arc of history. And more broadly, if you strip away all the incredible world building that justifies the conceit, a Gundam's just a big metal guy stomping all over piddly metal tanks
Yes.
and sometimes buildings like Calvin the Mighty Giant. You can easily argue that the entire real robot concept is just a series of elaborate mental gymnastics designed to drag the terrifyingly cold and impersonal world of modern warfare back to the mostly imaginary good old days of dueling knights, or more precisely samurai, when a few really cool guys could dominate a battlefield. And while the
Whoa.
poignant human stories at the core of each Gundam entry are what make them worthwhile works of art, the allure of that slightly more grounded, grown-up fantasy is doubtless what draws many men to these shows at first, as assuredly as it puts butts in seats for every Top Gun. Of course, thanks to the shonen
Dragon
battle boom
Ball!
kickstarted by Dragon Ball and
Fist of the North Star!
and the magical girl resurgence
Sailor Moon!
begat by Sailor Moon, more adolescent power fantasies would eventually reassert their dominance in the late 80s and 90s, to the point that even Gundam started doing it, and that dominance would continue for decades through the rise of the Big Four and Pretty Cure, until SAO kicked off the big isekai/light novel boom of the early 2010s, and Kirito's officially supplanted Naruto's as the predominant species of protag-kun. A trend that's given us some of the best and worst power fantasies anime has to offer, and carried on until right around now with the wild success of
Solo Leveling!
which isn't fundamentally different from all the video gamey isekai and progression fantasy slop that's already flooded the anime market, but the prospect of slapping Sung Jin Woo in the thumbnail for easy clicks is like half the reason I'm making this video, so it must be doing something right. Actually,
Yeah, it is! What is it doing, though?
I'd argue it does quite a few things right, better than most video gamey isekai and progression fantasy slop at least, though it also does quite a bit wrong. Given the title and premise, for instance, you probably wouldn't be surprised to hear that Solo Leveling is a prime example of the Kirito effect, where the insanely OP hero gradually overshadows and renders irrelevant everyone who once fought beside him, except sometimes his wife.
Well, I think that's why it's working with Solo Leveling, because the anime... Let's note I watch the cut content videos, so I know other characters do get their moments, but in the anime, it is just him. They're not making a big deal about having other people there. Like, they just use them to kind of scale how strong he's getting. So you got the S ranks, and then they're like, whoa, this guy's like, you know, they build them up in the world and that, and it's like, that helps us gauge how strong he is getting within the world. I love it.
Then you might be surprised to hear that Solo Leveling actually has a pretty good supporting cast. Not great, and most of them aren't much help in...
Yeah, they don't do too much emphasis on it, so that when we don't see them, we don't like be like, oh, wish they were there. It's like, you know.
But it does give them a lot of stuff to do that kind of moves the plot along, or at least helps Sung Jin Woo move the plot along. They have personalities and thematically relevant arcs that reflect and contrast his own development, and some even expand the world building a scooch. And even Jin Woo himself has a bit of a personality. Not a big one, especially not after he gets all stoic and badass and stuff, but he has clear personal motivations, family values, a little sister he cares about, not in an anime way. He even makes decisions motivated by that personality and his goals and needs that move the plot forward, instead of it just sort of happening to him. And even the personality reduction that comes later as he becomes more stoic and badass has a thematic purpose and stakes behind it.
Yeah, it's like him understanding the system and that. Like that first moment where he had to kill people in the dungeon, and it's like, the system's making me do this. It's like, oh, he is changing.
Raising the question of whether all this monstrous power might be costing him his humanity. It's hardly Shakespeare or Togashi, but it's a hell of a lot more than your average "this guy everyone thought sucked rocks actually" anime. Still, it does kind of go to show just how bad the character writing in modern power fantasies has gotten that I'm willing to praise Sung Jin Woo for only being a partial audience insert character, for having family-oriented motivations that are merely designed to be as universally relatable as possible, instead of just being an awkward Asian teenager-shaped blank slate who can make nerdy references sometimes, for being surrounded by people who I could actually see being in like an okay K-drama instead of bad carbon copies of the author's top 10 favorite dating sim conquests.
I just think of the abridged version of Phone, Isekai.
And I can't believe it's not Isekai, right?
Oh, psychogladic.
They've gotten it in their heads that unless a hero looks and acts exactly like a
Kirito.
ChatGPT amalgamation of their target audience, that audience will never be able to relate to them or get into the escapism. And I really don't know where that idea came from, because shonen anime and mecha have never had that problem. And the most successful, acclaimed isekai and fantasy anime out there there are also pretty consistently the ones with eccentric, entertaining, and memorable heroes.
Yes.
I don't know what light novel writer needs
Yeah, why every time? Every time, every time.
to hear this, but humans can relate to other humans who aren't exact carbon copies of them. Most of us find that interesting, actually. It's kind of
Yeah, Belle Crenell's interesting. Oh my god, yes.
the entire basis of storytelling? Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. This plague of wish fulfillment driven blank slate characterization unfortunately goes hand in hand with another problem facing modern power fantasies. No one seems to have any fucking patience anymore. Instead of
Mate, isn't that true?
lingering in the early and mid-level adventures, which every RPG player knows are the most fun part of any campaign, too many anime these days are champing
Just
at the bit
speed
to
run
get
it.
their hero out with endgame gear and spells and
Straight
send him
away.
off to fight God or at least a super boss or two before his hometown's even burned all the way down. The instinct's understandable. People are here for cool guys doing cool things, right?
But when you do it too quick, then it's like, what's next? Do you know what I mean? You need that build up. That's why solo leveling's so good. Like, you're seeing him level up and gain more abilities, gain more shadows and stuff, and, like, you know, see him fight bosses that he does kind of struggle against sometimes, and he gets to gauge his...
So the cooler things get, the faster, the better. But in reality, that rush for instant and maximal gratification hamstrings these shows' ability to make their guys and things cool at all. Brandon Sanderson, Western fantasy's preeminent power fantasy purveyor, built his entire empire on the back of 3 rules. An author's ability to solve conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic. What powers can't do is more interesting than what they can, and expand on what you have before you add something new. The first law is self-explanatory, while the other 2 help make your power system exposition dumps actually matter to the reader. Giving a power clear limitations makes its application feel less hand-wavy and leads to satisfying aha moments for your audience when
Yeah, JoJo's 6. Like, oh, I can do this. Oh, yes! Yeah.
the character finds a creative workaround for those limitations.
When that piece
Refraining
returns
from making
back.
up
Yeah.
those
Oh my god, JoJo's!
powers, meanwhile, forces you to use more of those workarounds and ensures the audience won't get overloaded trying to remember all of the different powers that everyone has. So when an anime kicks off by giving its hero the power to copy powers, or hands him a bag of holding full of 80 different magic tools and enchanted pieces of equipment, or has him montage grind his way through 20 different VR MMO skills in half an hour, even if you flash up a stat screen with the name and explanation for all of the things that he just got, the only person who will ever remember that is the guy filling out the wiki. You may as well have explained nothing and just given him a magic genie with infinite wishes. Shangri-La Frontier is a great example of how restraint and focus and building your hero's skill set and equipment can pay off, but the same copyright trolls who took down Zenshu from the Ones to Watch video this winter are all over that show right now, so I'd rather not risk playing any clips.
Oh, damn.
Solo leveling does a pretty decent job of this too, though. Between the invisibility, buffs and debuffs, enchanted weapons, manifesting those weapons plus potions and other stuff out of thin air, necromancy, and push-up related teleportation, one could argue that Sung Jin-woo has perhaps too many powers, but it's still few enough that you can remember what they all do. There's not much overlap between them, and each one is highlighted prominently when he gets it, so you have a chance to learn what they do. And if there's one thing that all the light novel, manga, and anime writers who definitely aren't watching this video should take away from it, it's that this is how you make the power part of your power fantasy feel satisfying. Well, this and having stupid, awesome action animation.
Yeah,
if you're banking on
the
that,
animation's
you're
boss.
setting yourself up for failure. And even if you are lucky enough to get that stupid, awesome money for your production, your story needs to be more and less than stupid, awesome sometimes. Back when I was studying game design at Vancouver Film School, one of the concepts the teachers were keenest to drill into our heads was the interest curve. Longtime viewers might remember me talking about this at length in my Haikyuu What's in an OP 9 years ago. Better get started on that 10th anniversary video. Anyway,
Whoa.
to give you the short version, intense emotions evoked by media only feel as intense as the difference between the thing you're experiencing now and the last thing you experienced. A gunfight breaking out after a tense standoff in a bar, for instance, is gonna feel a lot more exciting than the exact same gunfight following a giant robot beating a kaiju to death. If every scene is 10 out of 10 intense, it feels just as monotonous as every scene being a 1.
True.
Steady escalation works a lot better, but after a while that can also get predictable and exhausting. You need to give your audience downtime to process the crazy shit that just happened and reset their calibration for what counts as crazy. Plus, just going straight from 1 to 10 leaves you with a boring intro. So the optimal approach is to hook people in with like a level 6 or 7 scene so they know how exciting your thing can be, but you still have somewhere to go from there. Then ease off to a 1 or 2 and build back up in a series of escalating peaks and valleys until you're hitting 9s and 10s in your climax. I learned this in terms of like difficulty spikes and big set piece moments in level design. You know, the asylum demon fucking you up in Dark Souls or dangling off that train in Uncharted 2, but it applies to all forms of media and all kinds of emotion. Think of how the instruments kick in gradually before the crescendo of Beethoven's Ode to Joy. In a rom-com, you want to build up and ease off the doki doki feelings to maintain romantic tension. In a regular comedy, you want to warm the audience up with a gradual escalation of ridiculousness and give them time to breathe after the big laughs. And in a power fantasy, you want moments of struggle and maybe even a few serious setbacks between the big cathartic triumphs to maximize that catharsis. The contrast accentuates the impact. The harder the battle, the more glorious the victory.
Oh,
You
mate,
can
yeah,
see
Code
this
Geass is perfect build up to the end, man. Like, oh.
principle at play in every Dragon Ball saga.
Yeah.
As the Z Fighters struggle against a new villain, get beaten down, then get back up, and eventually save the day. And their most memorable victories, Cell, Frieza, King Piccolo, all come on the heels of their most devastating defeats to date. Most One Piece arcs involve a villain smacking
Crocodile. When he,
around until he bounces back hard enough to knock them off their high horse, and that's hype as f***. Hell, Jujutsu Kaisen's heroes lose more often than they win, but when they do win...
Oh, it just feels so good. This was brilliant. This, you couldn't help but smile because this guy was a proper villain. Proper bad guy, did not give a fuck, and then this was just sick.
And it blows the roof off the internet. In contrast, so many modern reincarnated in a VR MMO where my off-meta class is actually super OP type things fall flat on their face right out of the gate because they're scared to make an audience that's here to be validated feel bad by kicking their Kirito's ass or letting him fuck up a little first. Even in last year's failure frame, which ostensibly starts with a whole episode of Protag getting shit on, the shitting is entirely verbal bullying, and as soon as he's actually faced with a monster, he wins and keeps winning forever. And the audience does seem to validate that cowardice to an extent. If you look at Crunchyroll review counts and MAL pages, the average attach rate for this slop is pretty damn high compared to other anime. But in the rare cases where these things see a sequel, we can see that the drop rate is just as high. In Another World with My Smartphone has almost twice as many MAL viewers as Ascendants of a Bookworm, but when it comes to sequels, it barely scraped together 2/3 of Bookworm's viewership. It's fun watching a guy win and get the girl, but if all he does after that is win more and get more girls, stick around and see what happens next. You know what's going to happen next. Solo leveling does and doesn't solve this problem. Obviously, it's not afraid to kick Sung Jinwoo's ass at first, and the Double Dungeon does a good job of establishing what baseline D to B rank hunter skills look like, how our E rank hero falls short of that, and the god tier S+ level threats that he'll eventually rise up to challenge. And after he becomes the solo leveler, the show still does a good job of scaling the bigness and badness of the monsters he faces from episode to episode, mixing up groups of mobs, bosses and mini-bosses
Big
to keep him on
Chris.
his toes. A trend that even carries on into the current season. Last arc, he fought some sentient monsters in an open field, which was scary. And now some different sentient monsters have dragged his party onto their home turf, which is even scarier. There was also a fun little bit before that where he had to stunt on the sentient monsters while staying invisible so the party he was trying to protect wouldn't find out how OP he was because he was incognito as their pack mule at the time. So there's even a bit of variety in the challenges the show throws at him. And if we're given credit where it's due, dungeon theming and area layouts also show a lot more variety than, say, Sword Art Online. If this was a video game, I'd say it's pretty well designed. But it's not a video game, so the challenge level only means anything if it actually affects the progression of the plot. And while every other encounter is set up to be like 2 to 3 levels ahead of Sung Jin Woo, so he's got to sweat it out and cheese him a bit to score that clutch victory, instead of just effortlessly raffle stomping everything, every other encounter is set up to be like 2 to 3 levels ahead of him so he can sweat it out, cheese it a bit, and score a clutch victory. With the fight choreography and the heavy breathing close-ups and the near misses into clever counterattacks and the awesome sound effects, the animation certainly captures the aesthetic of a Soulsian struggle battle, but in terms of narrative rhythm, it's more like a level-scaled Elder Scrolls game, where the monsters keep getting tougher, but only exactly as much as the hero does, so the relative intensity of each fight remains basically flat. Except, of course, for that one time, but then he forgot to do his push-ups, so he got sent to the forgot to do your push-ups dimension, where he was able to heal up and grind until the enemy was 2 to 3 levels ahead of him, so he could sweat it out, cheese it a bit, and score a clutch victory. And I think that this is the single biggest issue with power fantasies that try to quantify their power levels like some sort of video game. There is a certain crunchy Skinner-Boxian satisfaction in seeing a hero get a little bit objectively stronger every episode because his numbers went up, but the story can only really respond to that by making the numbers of his enemies go also up. It locks you into a linear vertical progression loop that gives the hero and his foes almost no room for lateral advancement.
It's the power creep, isn't it? That's the phrase that people used to use for like Shonen Jump stuff, where it's like, you know, the hero gets stronger, so the enemies have to as well,
is having the characters master the nuances of powers they already have, instead of just making those powers better or giving them new ones. Think of how Luffy expands the versatility of his Gum-Gum powers with Gears 2 and 3, compared to how he enhances them with Haki in Gear 4 and awakens a new form of them in Gear 5. The former gears fundamentally alter the nature and complexity of the challenges Luffy can take on, while the latter ones mainly help him hit bigger, scarier guys harder, or funnier in Gear 5's case. This isn't to say that lateral advancement is strictly better than vertical. If that's all you have, it can create the sort of monotony that typifies Stardust Crusaders, where until the last few fights, the guys Joey Jojo Auras each week don't really get scarier, just differently weird. Ideally, you want a bit of both, like how Radiance and Stormlight Archive both develop greater control over their surges and spren, and advance to new ideals once a book or so. Or how Sacred Artists in Cradle develop and refine a handful of signature techniques while they're climbing through the same advancement levels as everyone else. That way, you can have fights that top each other in both spectacle and complexity, satisfying the id and the intellect. Don't get me wrong, the kind of hype that solo leveling delivers doesn't just appear out of nowhere in the presence of good animation. There is some solid micro-level writing going on here. Minute to minute, scene to scene, quip to quip, the script deploys jobbers effectively, pushes Jinwoo into corners he's got to think his way out of, or not push up his way out of, as the case may be, and generally does a good job of creating a distinct context for who he's fighting and why they deserve an ass kicking. But the Sakuga Saga and Sawano drops are definitely doing a lot of heavy lifting, just like the art does in the manhwa. And on a macro level, once you're clued into the pattern, you know how almost every fight's gonna go from the start. Either some cocky evil bitch underestimates Sung and gets his teeth pushed in, or Sung gets in a little over his head and claws his way out. Occasionally, he'll get in way over his head to keep you on your toes, but then some sort of Deus Ex Machina inevitably saves him at the last second, like in the double dungeon or the push-ups thing. And to be fair, that is still more than most light novel shit ever does to mix things up, but to be balanced, it still means that no fight is ever gonna cost Sung Jin Woo anything the audience might really miss, which leaves the fights lacking in bite, even compared to other anime that are frequently criticized for being light on lasting consequences and overly predictable, like Dragon Ball or One Piece. And it's a world apart from genuinely unpredictable power fantasies with heavy stakes and meaningful consequences like Gundam, Hunter x Hunter, Re:Zero, Chainsaw Man, Dan, Jujutsu Kaisen, or FMA. Please note that meaningful consequences doesn't have to mean constant character deaths, just failures that permanently alter the status quo and force the characters to adapt in some way. You know, some hardship to sweeten the victory, which, despite its reputation, One Piece does actually do when circumstances pull the crew apart or pit them against each other, or when they have to leave a friend behind. And while that's usually temporary, the sagas where it lasts a while tend to be held up as the best in the series. Alabasta, Water 7, The Summit War, Dressrosa through Whole Cake Island. Of course, those consequences don't usually hinge on winning or losing one fight, but then One Piece is more of an adventure story with power fantasy elements anyway, where the fights come second to moments of wonder, discovery, and laughter. The sheer length and breadth of the journey goes a long way toward making the predictable results of those fights feel satisfying and earned. And that points to one of the single best things that any writer can do to make their power fantasy more interesting. Give the hero a goal orthogonal to just getting stronger and beating guys up.
Yeah, so like that's what I like about this solo leveling anime. Is like he's trying to not just do it for himself, but his family, and then the whole mum thing as well. Like where he's trying to like get the elixir of life. It's just like so it's like, because obviously I know through doing the content videos, initially it's just all about him wanting to get stronger, and then it's just, I could also at the same time save my mum. But then the anime has taken the whole approach of that is why he is mainly doing it. I think that's a really good idea. Yeah, give him goals.
The cool guy doing cool things isn't the sole focal point of the story, then so long as the bits that are the focal point follow a satisfying progression, like the romance in Dan, and also Ari Ferretta, weirdly. The escalation of comedy in One Punch Man, the surrealist horror in Chainsaw Man, the unraveling mystery in FMA, or the character development in Mob Psycho 100.
Whoa.
You can get away with eschewing the power curve and making your heroes insanely OP right out of the gate. Or you can even get away with keeping him weak for a good long while, piling horror and misery on him to and past his breaking point, and only then giving him any real combat powers when you're building him back up from those shattered pieces. Until eventually, he's fighting dragons, giving rousing speeches to inspire cities under siege, storming cathedrals, and rescuing pretty girls from marriage-minded kidnappers, just like any power fantasy type hero, and only dying a little bit along the way. Which, to me at least, felt infinitely more satisfying and cool than any of the, on paper, way more insane and hyped up shit that I've seen Sung Jin Woo pull off, as has every other small victory that Subaru's earned along the way. Because I've been there with him through every agonizing step to get there, instead of just hearing that he was kind of a weak guy and seeing him get his ass kicked once. The harder the battle, the more glorious the victory.
Yeah, alright, okay, I see where you're going.
Amazing for the part of me that just wants to be a kid watching Saturday morning cartoons again, but it does very little for the adult that wants something deeper and more rewarding. ReZero is a power fantasy that satisfies both sides immensely, and noting how hyped those moments got me in Season 3 is another quarter of why I'm making this video. Though, ironically, the fact that it's so good at doing that has caused a lot of ReZero fans to reject the idea that it's a power fantasy at all, using the obvious fact that nobody would want to go through what Subaru goes through to dismiss the equally obvious fact that everybody would love to be where he ends up. Politically influential, surrounded by babes, championed to the masses with cool friends who think he's cool, the best dog, and magic powers. It's still wish fulfillment, just long con wish fulfillment that holds a mirror up to the viewer and makes them take a long, hard look at themselves and what they're wishing for before exploring what it actually takes to become the kind of guy that men want to be and women want to be with, superpowers or no. Then it starts actually giving him powers that might be fun to use and letting him help beat up bad guys by means other than suicidal attrition. After he's earned it, but more importantly, after he and we have been through enough to really appreciate it. Ask yourself, do you feel more powerful after taking out 50 bazillion freedom fighters in Call of Duty, or one nemesis in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis? How about when you kill a dragon in Skyrim versus Elden Ring? The latter games don't give away the feeling for free, but that doesn't mean that's not what they're selling. The temporary disempowerment doesn't negate the power fantasy, it enhances it. And ReZero is able to leverage that principle better than pretty much any other isekai because it's more than just a power fantasy. Because it's got characters worth paying attention to, themes worth exploring, a world worth building, and a whole bunch of existentially terrifying shit to keep the viewer who comes for the otherworldly power trip and stays for the bloody rug pulls engaged until the power trip comes back. But also, crucially, it does keep breadcrumbing that viewer along with a little taste of empowerment at the end of basically every arc, so they know where it's going. One that's all the sweeter for the struggle to get there. Personally, I think it's silly to pretend that's not part of the show's appeal. To be embarrassed about enjoying good power fantasies just because there are so many bad and mediocre ones out there. Or, I guess, because cathartic empowerment is basic and you're supposed to want more than that from the art you consume. Most genres of fiction are built around a shallow appeal to one of our baser wants. Regular fantasy and sci-fi lets us get away from it all. Romance plays to our desire for connection and affection. Horror tickles our amygdala. And mysteries make us feel like very smart boys who deserve a sticker. Nobody bats an eye when any of those genres produces a fine work of art or people say that they really love them. The base appeal at the heart of a power fantasy may be more appealing than most, but that just means that a good artist can use that appeal to draw an even bigger audience to their good art than they could with one of those other genres. And I do include Solo Leveling in that good art category. It kind of is Shakespeare in that way. Shakespeare in the context of his own time, when his greatest strength was giving the people what they wanted. Though, obviously, I think ReZero is way more Shakespeare. Still, there is something to be said for anime that are simple, satisfying, and pretty to look at. I like looking at pretty things, and sometimes not thinking about them too, even if I did end up clearly thinking way too hard about this particular one. Though, of course, that also means that a bad or lazy artist can pull an outsized audience for their warmed-over dog shit just by chasing trends and instantly, endlessly bouncing on their blank slate Kirito's dick. And the ease with which that can be done basically guarantees that the crack to cocaine ratio in the market will always be lopsided. Also, lots of them just turn out to be lumps of baking soda. And like crack, I have seen it argued that the prevalence of all this slop has a negative effect on society, engendering an attitude that hard work is meaningless, and if you don't have everything that you want just handed to you on a silver platter, you may as well give up, while feeding men's feelings of entitlement and aggression. But like crack, I'd argue that millions of people clamoring for instant simulated social status because they're dissatisfied with life is a symptom, not the disease, and there's definitely worse ways to self-medicate Medicaid. Like crack. At least with power fantasies, there's a chance that craving might lead you to something like ReZero, Mob Psycho, or Stormlight that can show you a good time and a better way. But even if you just have a good time for an hour or 6, that's worth a lot in these trying times. And if you're looking for a new good time to enjoy during work or commute time when you can't watch anime, I'd like to once again recommend checking out the Cradle series on audiobook. I had to scrap a longer section on it because I felt like more familiar anime examples would help you guys get my points better, but the last quarter of why I wrote this video is that I got obsessed with these books and binged all of them last year, and I had an absolute blast. For anyone who enjoys Brandon Sanderson, Will White offers similarly great hard magic action at a much faster pace with jokes that are actually funny. And Travis Baldree is an amazing narrator. It's like shonen anime for your ears. I'm Jeff Thu, professional guy who forgot to write an outro for this video. Goodbye.
Damn, yeah, so I like how he acknowledges that solo leveling is good, but it is lacking in certain aspects. But it really stands out, you know. Like, yeah, it's not afraid to let the hero struggle, and I think that is where things go wrong. A lot of these anime that come out now is just like he has to win every single time and from the very beginning. Where it's like you do have moments of solo leveling where it's like, oh no, this is a bit strong, clutch it. But yeah, cool video, and yeah, thanks for watching.